So welcome everyone. We'll get started now. So thank you very much for joining our August webinar. It's great to have you here today. So today's theme is on advancing pediatric treatments, 3D printing innovations for child-friendly medicines. My name is Anna Worsley and I am the CEO of FABRX and I'll be today's host. Today we are excited to have Brooke Bernhardt join us from the United States to talk about how pharmaceutical 3D printing can help resolve the needs of St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital in Tennessee for pediatric-specific medications. We then have our own Alvaro Goyanes to discuss his experiences developing child-friendly medications and important aspects to consider. So first up, we've got Brooke. Brooke is the Chief Pharmacy Officer and Division Director of Pharmaceutical Sciences in the Department of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, in the United States. As a clinician scientist and healthcare leader, her goal is to improve the treatment of catastrophic childhood illnesses by minimizing treatment-related toxicities and optimizing therapeutic approaches with a lens on precision medication. Her research and lab currently has three major focus areas: the exploration of pharmacogenes in large, diverse cohorts of pediatric patients with cancer, the study of pharmacogenomics in survivors of childhood cancer, and the refinement of drug delivery methods via semi-autonomous and three-dimensional printing of pharmaceuticals. Thank you very much, Brooke. You can go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you might be. So again, as was mentioned in the introduction, I'm the Chief Pharmacy Officer at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in Memphis, Tennessee. And I'm going to give you a little bit of some insight into how we think that we may try to apply 3D printing for pediatric patients. I think this has been a really interesting journey for us to learn how this may apply to our patient population. So if you're not familiar with St. Jude, I just want to give you a little bit of background about who we are. We were founded by Danny Thomas, who was a celebrity in the United States. He was an immigrant and he worked in Hollywood and in the music industry. We opened on February 4th, 1962, which was a really pivotal time period in the United States. A lot of things were changing during that time. And our mission was revolutionary at the time, and it still is today, which is to advance cures, means of prevention for pediatric catastrophic diseases through research and development. And I mention that because research is in the title of our hospital name, and that's unique compared to many of our peers. We are a fairly large, over 100-acre campus with about almost 3 million square feet of space, and we continue to grow. Yet we only have about 73 inpatient beds, which is quite small compared to other children's hospitals. We have a large outpatient operation with over 200,000 outpatient visits per year and about 8,000 unique patients or research participants every year. And about 600 newly diagnosed patients with cancer and a similar number with hematologic diseases. And this is all done irrespective of the patient or the family's ability to pay or their religious or ethnic background. The Department of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences, where I work, has recently revised our mission and vision. And our mission is to generate new knowledge, to advance pharmacotherapy, and to provide the best patient care for children with catastrophic diseases. So we do this through our three pillars of patient care: discovery and implementation, and training and advocacy. So this may be different than a typical department of pharmacy that you see in other places. And our vision is that we will transform pharmacotherapy for patients with catastrophic diseases. A lot of times people associate St. Jude with pediatric cancer, which is a huge part of what we do. But we also treat patients with hematologic diseases, sickle cell, thalassemias, hemophilia. We also see patients with infectious diseases such as HIV, and then of course some rare neurologic diseases as well, which with gene therapies and gene editing that are some of the things that we're starting to explore as well. So our motivation in pediatrics is unique, and this is what I want to talk about today. This is actually a photograph of some of the initial HIV medications that we gave here at St. Jude to pediatric patients in the early 1990s. This is, if you may recognize, this is Sestiva, a medication that clearly is not going to be easy for a young child to take. The capsules and the tablets are quite large, and so we often are faced with this challenge in pediatric patients when new medications are brought to market. Our motivations include, number one, that the commercially available products, as I mentioned, are designed for adults. They're designed for the biggest market population, which is us in the adult world. We also struggle because although extemporaneous compounding is a long-standing practice, pharmacists have been doing this for millennia. I mean, the mortar and pestle goes back many centuries. But we have to balance the risk of error in that practice with the benefit of also providing life-saving medications. I think that what we see is that there's a waxing and waning of available information about how to compound medications for pediatric patients due to regulations, practices in different countries, and whatnot. And I think that extemporaneous compounding is something that we really need to continue to embrace as a profession and not let it sort of die out as practice. Published compounding data are increasingly scarce, and this is something that I have been faced with my entire career as someone who's worked in clinical trials in the pediatric oncology space. We commonly see clinical trials get to a certain point in early development, maybe phase 2, where there's a need for a suspension because pediatric patients are not able to take those oral dosage forms. And when it comes to the point at which we try to expand the clinical trial to lower age ranges, lower body surface area, lower weights, we're faced with the challenge of taking an oral dosage form and converting that into a suspension or solution, which may or may not be feasible and may or may not be amenable to what the patient really needs based on the way that it is compounded. Often these are hazardous drugs, and that can be challenging for a mother potentially, or a father who's also managing the care of other children in the household. The lack of appropriate dosage forms may reduce treatment outcomes in children. We know that pediatric patients with leukemia who don't routinely take their mercaptopurine are at an increased risk of relapse. We also know that pediatric patients with solid organ transplants who don't routinely take their immunosuppression are at a risk for graft failure or graft rejection. And so these are types of things that we really need to work harder at to optimize outcomes in pediatric patients. And lastly, regulatory agencies often encourage studying the viewpoint of the pediatric patient on the acceptability of pharmaceutical products. However, we don't typically include that as part of the research and development that has occurred over the past several decades. So that's something that we're going to embrace, hopefully, going forward. As to some of the points on the previous slide, I mentioned that commercially available products are designed for adults. So to put that into perspective for pediatric oncology, there was a paper that was published a few years ago that showed that it analyzed the extemporaneous compounding data of FDA-approved oral anti-cancer agents over about a 2.5 to 3 year period. The authors reviewed 6 sources of information for each agent to identify if there were compounding instructions available. So they looked in the FDA-approved package labeling. They looked in other third-party or tertiary drug information resources. They also contacted manufacturers and their medical information hotlines and emails to ask for additional information. They searched on clinicaltrials.gov to see if there was something in development, looked in the primary literature for cases or published stability studies, and also searched any medical or pharmacy listservs that they had at their fingertips. In this 2.5 to 3 year period, they found 85 agents. These are typically those novel oral anti-cancer agents that were approved by the FDA. Only 9 of them had information in the label for an alternative dosage form, such as the suspension or solution, and 3 of them had commercially available suspensions. So only 3 of the 85 had something that may have been amenable to a pediatric patient. 46 of these agents had what we call other sources of data. So it may have been a case report in the literature. It could have been information that the manufacturer has on file or a clinical trial that was in flight. And then lastly, there were 30 agents that had no information whatsoever how to manipulate the dosage form or provide an alternative dosage form for pediatric patients. So this is really limiting into how we treat our patients. What we see now in pediatric cancer is we're often looking at treating the patients or the tumor's target. So We may have a drug that's approved for prostate cancer, for example, but due to the way that the drug works, it may actually have a benefit in a different type of tumor, a solid tumor or a brain tumor. And so even though it was originally studied in one disease state, we may find value in using it in pediatric patients in a different way. And so having this information is critically important for us to be able to move the field forward. It's not really advantageous for pharma to seek FDA approval for some of these super rare pediatric indications where there may only be a dozen or so in the United States in a year. And so I think that we really need to find better ways to provide these agents to pediatric patients. And lastly, I'll note that since 2020, there have been another 24 novel oral anti-cancer agents approved by the FDA, where again, we don't have all of the information available to provide these to pediatric patients. These are some examples of some of those pain points in pediatric oncology that I hear from my peers across the United States. And some of them you can see are novel and some are some of the more traditional agents as well. This is not comprehensive. So at this point, I want you to think about two different things. So I'm going to have two questions. The first question for you to think about as we move forward in the presentation is, what if the solution to this problem is not a solution? We commonly think, oh, well, the patient can't take this oral capsule or they can't take this tablet. And so let's find a way to grind it up or measure out the powder and mix it in some sort of a blend to provide a suspension. But I'd like to pose that perhaps that's not the right solution for all patients. And secondly, what actually makes a medication acceptable to a child? If you have children, you've treated children, or you know a child, you know that even when there is a liquid or a suspension available, oral disintegrating tablet or a film, that's often still not very acceptable. And I think that we need to really reconsider and ask our children what makes a medication acceptable to them. So I'm going to talk briefly about three different studies. I'm not going to go into detail about these, but I'm just bringing these to your awareness. The first was a visual preference study of 3D printed tablets. This was a single site, two-part study that initially included 368 patients for the visual preferences survey and had about 310 patients who provided additional answers to open-ended questions. The goal of the study was to determine preferences and opinions based on visual inspection of these printed tablets and included patients or children ages 4 to 11. So you can see in this figure on the left is that there were 4 different types of 3D printed tablets available. And although patients had a specific preference for one, when they were taught that or told that the semi-solid extrusion or the SSE was a chewable gummy, they swiftly changed their mind and decided that was actually the one that they preferred. And so again, this brings to light that the types of questions we ask children and the way that we teach them about their medications can significantly impact the type of medications and potentially influence adherence as well. The next study I want to mention is the CAT3D, or Creating Acceptable Tablet study. The aims of this study included to explore the administration of a 3D printed tablet, again, in that young children around ages 4 to 12, and to compare the patient acceptance of a standard tablet versus an equivalent 3D printed tablet. And I have the study flow on the right hand here, as well as the picture of the tablets that were printed or provided. The investigators evaluated several attributes, including the swallowability, acceptability, the mouthfeel, volume of water consumed, and the taste of the tablets. And overall, I think they included around 30 patients or so. There were very minimal differences between the standard and 3D printed tablets. The patients, had very similar acceptance of both of them. The one thing that really was notable was that the smaller tablet, the 6mm tablet, was perhaps the most desirable. So I think that this is a good sort of introductory way to start to study how patients may, how different tablets may appeal to different patients. And then lastly, I want to mention a study that the FABRX group did here, which was a 3D printed tablet study to treat rare pediatric diseases. The reason why I find this study interesting is because this is one of the first studies, maybe the first study, where we actually have clinical outcomes. So patients treated with 3D printed tablets and then the clinical impact of that. And the two aims of the study were to explore the feasibility of 3D printed tablets for pediatric patients with rare diseases. And then secondly, to evaluate and compare the efficacy and the acceptability of the 3D printed versus conventional medications, again, in that young child age range. And here it was ages 6 to 14. So on this slide, you can see the outcomes of the study. There were 6 patients who were treated with the two, and what the investigators determined was that pediatric patients who received the 3D tablets had similar clinical outcomes, but perhaps even better or more tighter control of their disease or of the medication levels based on receipt of the 3D tablet as opposed to the conventional treatment. So I think this is really early, but really promising data on the potential impact of providing very highly personalized treatment with 3D printed medications. And then lastly, I will mention that there's, we looked at these 3 prior studies, looked at several things: the mouthfeel, the water, the acceptability, the taste, et cetera. And so I think we really need to provide information to our regulatory authorities about what is acceptable for pediatric patients. And in this study, the investigators looked at or created a composite endpoint for acceptability instead of just only looking at taste or only looking at appearance. They tried to determine what was the best way to evaluate what a pediatric patient would find as acceptable. In this study, they looked at 5 different dosage forms, and you can see here that there's sort of good to high acceptance for most of them. But the mini tablets and the oblong tablets had significantly better acceptability than perhaps syrups and oral dispersible films. And why that's important is because, well, syrups and oral dispersible films are commonly things that we think of as, oh, well, the pediatric patient can't take the tablet, then let's switch them to a syrup or a suspension. But in fact, what we're seeing here is that maybe instead we just need to find a better way to make a better tablet for the patient. And this is really influenced, for those of you who are impacted by the EMA, there's, or work practice in Europe, that there's a letter of support for composite endpoint method. And so I think it's really important for us to understand how the work that we do and how we can relay that back to regulatory authorities and help them understand what's important in the approval process as well for pediatric patients. Lastly, I do want to mention printing pilots. So at St. Jude, we've started to test some of this technology. We're interested in exploring all the different printing technologies that are available in the market. So far, we've completed at least a 1-week pilot period where we have taught pharmacists and technicians through hands-on training through 3 different products and dosage forms to stress test the system. We have actually a decent amount of experience with semi-solid extrusion, which I think most people agree is sort of the best method going forward. And we've found that our analytical testing internally, as well as external analytical testing, validates the recipes that were provided to us, which gives us the comfort level of saying, as an end user, if we may have the ability to create our own sort of 3D printed recipes, but if not, if we receive them from a validated source, that yes, what we're making through our print method is actually what we expect to deliver. Some of our future goals at St. Jude are included here. So we're in the process of prioritizing the products for development through printing. We are hoping to design and prepare products on our priority list and use an implementation science approach to evaluate the performance of the output through not just pediatric acceptance, palatability, the mouthfeel, et cetera, but also looking at the performance of the machine as we think that it should be, and comparing it perhaps across a variety of different equipment, different machines. We're very interested in the bioequivalence of medications with narrow therapeutic index and other medications where therapeutic drug monitoring may be important. We're also interested in comparing device-to-device performance. I started to mention that, studying the potential impact of these technologies to mitigate drug shortages. And then lastly, really to look at options for clinical trials. And the clinical trials could be something as sort of simple as, what is the best flavor for US children? We know that prior studies have said that bubblegum or grape are perhaps the most interesting for children in the US, and that is perhaps not the same around the world. In other countries, different flavors may be more popular. And so we're interested in studying that. We're also interested in studying if there are ways that we can bring products to clinical trials faster using 3D printing instead of sort of waiting for a more formal development process. So with that, I think I'll pass off the mic to Anna. I'll go back to you.
Thank you very much, Brooke. It was a really fascinating talk there. And just to add, in Spain, we recorded orange was the favorite flavor of kids. So it'd be really, really interesting to see what the favorite flavor is for the United States, as well as for every single state. I imagine it could be different.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So next up, we've got Alvaro Goyanes. Dr. Goyanes is a co-founder of FABRX. He also serves as honorary lecturer at the University College London and a lecturer at the University of Santiago de Compostela in Spain. His groundbreaking work in personalized medicine has earned him recognition as a highly cited researcher by Clarivate since 2019, and he was one of the first researchers investigating pharmaceutical 3D printing for personalized medicine. He led the world's first clinical study back in 2018. Thank you, Alvaro.
Thank you, Anna. Welcome everyone for this webinar. I'm really excited about talking of the development of medicines for pediatrics. My talk is about implementation of child-friendly medicines in hospitals and pharmacies, and this is our aim, my personal aim, and the aim of FABRX, a move from the lab to the clinic, and this is very important. Why this is important? Because we are all different. If we select a sample of population, we have people of different ages, gender, ethnicity, with different diseases, body types, taking different medicines. So we cannot give them the same medicines. So we need to make medicines personalized. And this is especially important for pediatric patients, because even some medicines that for adults work very well, like paracetamol, acetaminophen, then if we take the same medicine into children, we need to dose accordingly to weight or surface of the body. So it's very important to have medicines personalized. Right now, the most conventional way of making medicines personalized is through compounding, manual preparation of medicines. In some countries, it's quite important, like in the US. In other countries, it's more centralized, like in the UK, what is called pharmaceutical specials. In many countries in Europe is done in different hospitals and pharmacies. It changes from country to country, but it's the same concept. So what we aim is to get medicines personalized using 3D printing. 3D printing is a layer by layer process controlled by software. We can easily change the characteristics of the medicines that we want to manufacture, changing some parameters in the software, so we can automate compounding. Automating compounding, we can get safer medicines, we can implement quality control systems, balance, NIR, pressure sensor. We can increase personalization options, not only in terms of dose, excipients, but also in terms of flavors, shapes, whatever we think is possible. We can print, if we have these medicines in hospitals and pharmacies, we can print these medicines closer to the patient. So we don't need to have like a stock of different medicines with different strengths. We can have just stock of one ink and manufacture all the different strengths with one ink. So it's more environmentally friendly. And there is a lot of potential for the use of this technology for clinical trials. Why? Because in a clinical trial, we normally need to change the dose during the clinical trial. And instead of having batches with different doses, we can print the same day the patient is going to take the medicine, the specific dose for this patient, change it next day based on the blood levels or the clinical output. So we can move faster and cheaper into clinic. And this is obviously very relevant for the whole population, but is especially important for pediatric patients. And pediatric patients, I think, is probably the key for 3D printing. No? When we started doing 3D printing, I started personally in 2014 in UCL. UCL is University College London, is one of the universities in London. We started doing research about 3D printing in the lab, the potential use of making medicines. We always thought that making medicines using a 3D printer was a great idea in terms of personalization of doses, and we always thought about printing medicines in hospitals and pharmacies. In 2014, when I was going to a conference saying that we are going to print medicines in hospitals and pharmacies, everybody thought that I was mental, that they were telling me that this is not going to happen. It's going to be impossible to print medicines in a hospital. They said there are many regulatory concerns, many problems, the technology was not there. So what we had to do is actually print medicines in a hospital. And in 2018, we moved a 3D printer into a hospital. It was actually in Spain. We selected patients with a rare metabolic disease called maple syrup urine disease, and we printed chewable tablets, chewable formulations for these patients. And these patients were actually pediatric patients, I think from 3-year-old to 16-year-old. And was a small number of patients, 4 patients, but we proved that it was possible to print chewable tablets in a hospital with different flavors. Patients loved these formulations. Actually, the test, the clinical study lasted for 6 months, but they wanted to continue. We couldn't continue because we didn't have the resources to have always the printer there. But the study was very successful. And thanks to this study in 2018, we were able to prove that it's possible to print in hospitals for pediatric patients, and that these patients actually love these medications compared to the traditional way of the medications were made, that were actually capsules filled manually. Thanks to this study, we were able to see the limitations of the technologies at that point. We were using a food printer that was not great. We were using a software that was not designed to printing medicines. So since 2018, we worked for 2 years to launch the first pharmaceutical 3D printer, the MediMaker one, and to develop software to control the printer. Since then, we did more studies. We did a second clinical study that was the one that Brooke mentioned in the presentation. And in this study, we did as well, was also in a hospital in Spain with a bigger number of patients, patients with rare metabolic diseases as well. But in this study, we not only printed one medicine, we printed combinations of different drugs in one medicine. The highlight of this study is that we were able to combine drugs in the same chewable tablets, and also the dose of these drugs. We were able to print 1.2 grams inside the tablets, chewable tablets, and the taste was good for them, and was a very high dose that we could change depending on the blood levels of the patients. So again, we proved that technology is evolving, that we can implement this in hospitals. And we were saying, what about pharmacies? So last year, well, not last year, actually, we're in 2025, this year, we printed medicines in a community pharmacy. In a community pharmacy, it was different because they wanted to print capsules. So instead of printing the shape of the capsule, what we did is use standard capsules and fill the capsules with the drug they were interested, but we print for the first time medicines using a 3D printer in a community pharmacy. Since then, and actually since 2020, we have multiple collaborations with many hospitals around the world. Gustave Roussy, Gustave Roussy is a hospital in Paris. They do a lot of research for cancer medicines, and they do a lot of research with pediatric patients as well. Great Ormond Street Hospital in London also is the biggest pediatric hospital in the UK. Valdebron in Spain, hospital in Hamburg as well. So many hospitals are working in developing medicines for pediatric patients because there is a real need for specific medicines for children. And 3D printing can do that and can do more than that. So with 3D printing, we can do actual 3D printing, that is layer by layer process. We add layers of different materials till we get the tablets, the 3D printed, but the same technology can be used for filling. What I mean with filling, so we can have a mold, a blister, and we add different amount of material inside the blister, and the shape that we get for the formulation is the shape of the blister. So we cannot change the shape when we are doing filling, blister filling or capsule filling, but if the shape is not relevant, we can print much faster through filling. It's possible to use molds with different shapes, blisters. It's possible to have capsules and fill capsules with different doses. What are the advantages of filling compared to 3D printing? Well, it's faster. We can have a liquid that solidifies very quick inside the blister of the capsule, and it's much faster than 3D printing. But what are the advantages of 3D printing? Well, with 3D printing, we can make different shapes, but also normally we can print higher doses. Why? Because one of the limitations of filling is that the doses sometimes cannot go that high. If we want to print 1 gram paracetamol doing filling, it's not possible. We need to do it by 3D printing. So we need to consider 3D printing and filling technologies. It's the same technology, but approaches that complement each other. So how is the process? Basically, we have a semi-solid extrusion print head that uses pharma ink inside the syringes. We scan the syringe, we put it in the printer, we select the dose, and we print. This is the example of blister filling. With blister filling, we have less people working to make the medicines, so we reduce the manual labor, we reduce the cost of the medicines. We can make hundreds of tablets in 1 hour, and in a working day, we can make thousands of tablets or capsules, and we reduce the exposure to these drugs for pharmacists, so it's safer. How is the process? Well, basically, right now we need to weight the drug and excipients together, mix it. We normally follow a protocol that is in the software. We get some labels that we put in the syringes. The syringes go inside the printer. We select the tray, the doses that we are going to print based on the QR code. We need to have the password, so we have track record of everything that is printed, who is printing that. We print directly into the blister holder, capsule holder. We have different quality control settings. For example, pressure. We can check if we are printing with the right pressure. And then we get a report with all the information about that specific batch, and the medicine can be given to the patient. So it's a very automatic process. The only part that is not so automatic is the preparation of the pharma ink. So we need to get different materials from different providers. We can provide the standard procedure, the SOP, to make the protocol, or we can adapt protocols from different providers. We work with companies that manufacture materials like Specialized RX, Pagron, PCCA, Medisca. So there are many companies around the world that manufacture these bases or these materials, and we can get the drugs from different manufacturers as well, raw powder drug, or sometimes in some specific cases, we can crush a tablet and use the drug inside the tablets. That's not the best approach. I don't really like that approach, but sometimes it's the only way of getting the drug because the raw powder is not available. So what we need to do is mix the raw powder with the bases, put it inside the syringe, and print. In the future, we are going to provide syringes with the drug inside. So the pharma ink, as a mixture of excipients and drug together, are going to be available. We have collaborations with some pharma companies to develop this type of syringes, and that's going to make the process much, much simpler. But right now, we need to manufacture the pharma ink in the hospital and in the pharmacy. This process, when I started in 2018 working in this hospital, it was a process that took almost 3 hours. Why? Because we were waiting 10 different excipients. We were boiling these excipients, mixing with the drug, adding the colorant. So it was a long process. Right now, we work in protocols that are very simple, just one excipient, one drug, mixed together and print. That's much simpler. We have providers from many different regions. So if you are in Brazil or if you are in India, you can have your local providers. And that's one of the advantages of 3D printing, that you can work with many different materials. What is important about 3D printing? For me, what is important is to understand that we don't do automatic compounding. What we don't want is to have just something that doesn't work, but in automatic way. We want to make compounding better. That's why We are the only company offering 3D printing with a balance, with a pressure sensor, with an NIR. So these quality control methods are able to provide information and say that, well, this is the right formulation. So we can know the weight of each individual tablet. We have a pressure sensor that knows if there is any blockage. If we are extruding at a pressure that is not the right pressure, we identify that. And for some formulations, we can use NIR to know the drug content inside the formulations. That is not always possible for all the drugs. If we are using very low concentration of drug, it's not possible, and maybe it's necessary to use other technologies like Raman. But these quality control methods are essential for the development of safe formulations. And this is our main aim, to get safe and better formulations. So for that, software is key, because we don't want pharmacists to develop 3D models and know about G-codes and the inside of what 3D printing is. That could be a bit complex. We want the pharmacists just to select the dose, follow a protocol to prepare the pharma ink and print. So for that, we have protocol libraries. We can share these protocols between different hospitals and pharmacies. We don't have like protocols that are secret for us. We share all the protocols. We publish a lot of articles with these protocols. So everything is inside the software. So users of our printers with the software can have access to protocols that are developed in different hospitals, if these hospitals want to share the protocols. Obviously, some pharma companies, they don't want to share the protocols because there are proprietary protocols, and there is the possibility of keeping the protocols safe. But with the software in clinical mode, we are sure that we are printing the right doses. We are very happy that we collaborate with hundreds of different institutions. We collaborate with compounding suppliers. Specialized RX is a supplier from the US that manufactures a lot of bases, Fagron, PCCA, Ginama, Medisca, in different countries, different materials, the different providers. We also work with pharmaceutical companies, some big pharmaceutical companies, small pharmaceutical companies, to develop clinical studies, to adapt the printer for their needs. One of the examples is Pfizer. With Pfizer, we publish articles together. There are other companies that we cannot cite here because of confidentiality. We work with regulatory authorities. Recently, we published an article with the CDC about the evaluation of safety of the printing technology for users. With the USP, regulatory agencies all over the world, we have contact. Many universities, research institutions, and obviously hospitals. Hospitals and pharmacies are key for the implementation of this technology. One of the examples that I mentioned was Gustave Roussy, the biggest hospital for cancer research in Europe. They have several printers of the MediMaker 2 that has 3 different print heads. So they are able to combine in one tablet 3 different drugs, for example. They can print high dose drugs, and they do taste masking, and they provide these medicines actually to treat patients. So whenever I talk to the team in Gustave Roussy, they are telling me, oh, now we are doing this. And I think like, this is crazy. I don't know how you are able to do that. And I think Gustave Roussy is one of the leading institution in 3D printing right now, because they are actually printing medication and giving this medication to patients as a standard practice, but also as clinical trials. I think they are running more than 7 clinical trials with 3D printing alone, in collaboration with pharma companies. So we also have collaborators all over the world, in US, Canada, Brazil, India, Japan, Saudi Arabia, and this is something that is very exciting for us. So we love collaborate, and we have always visitors in London or in Spain. We have facilities in Spain, in Santiago de Compostela. So we are very happy to host people if they have like interesting projects, and we are very happy to help. So although we are a company, Our vision is to make this technology available to almost everyone. As a company, what we offer is obviously the 3D printers that we sell or we rent or we have like collaboration agreements. We develop the software to control the printers, and we also develop formulations, the pharma ink to print. And we help researchers and pharmaceutical companies to develop this. And this is very important, especially for pediatric patients. What we need to consider for pediatric patients? Well, first is what type of medicines we are going to print for these patients. If there are chewable tablets, oral dispersible tablets, films, capsules, troches, it's very important to know if these medicines are going to be acceptable. In the past, we printed chewable tablets. Now we are able to print films as well and capsules. Maybe capsules are not the best, but if you teach the children how to swallow capsules, some of them are very happy having capsules. It's very important to ask patients, pediatric patients, so you have better idea about the acceptability, because maybe chewable tablets for some drugs like prednisolone is not so easy. Maybe chewable tablets work very well, but if you are not able to have an effective taste masking, it's not going to work, although the formulation chewable is very attractive. And also, you need to consider, are you making this medicine too attractive? Many of the concerns of the regulatory authorities when we talk about developing clinical trials for developing medicines for clinical trials with children is, you are making chewable tablets. Are they going to think that these are gummy and take 3 or 4 at the same time? Well, my answer is always, we make medicines attractive, but not that attractive that they want to take so many. Why? Because most of the drugs, the taste of these drugs is terrible, and we make this taste much better, but it's not like candy. But we need to consider that when we talk to regulatory authorities or whenever we develop new medicines. So our aim is to increase acceptability of these medicines for pediatric patients is key. If they don't want to take the medicine, that's a big problem. And sometimes we need to think about the acceptability of the children and also the parents or guardians, because for parents, sometimes it's very easy to get medication from a bottle, liquid medication, but children don't want that. So we need to find the balance about what parents want and children. We need to select the right drugs that are needed for children, that most of the times are only available for adults. It's important to consider, okay, we have a printable formulation, for example, hydrocortisone, but are we able to print from very low dose to high dose? That is what children need. So for that, maybe we cannot use filling, because in filling, we cannot go to higher doses. So we need to use 3D printing. And sometimes we need to have a combination of 3D printing and filling. That is done with the same equipment, but the only thing that we change are parameters in the software and formulation. It's important to know if there is published data. We publish a lot of our research articles saying like, this is the excipient we use, these are the doses we print, and knowing the pharmaceutical excipients that are used is very important, because we need to know if these pharmaceutical excipients are suitable for children. I found many studies that they say, oh, we prepare this formulation for children, and there is an excipient in this formulation that is not allowed, especially in Europe, from a regulatory point of view, is not allowed in children. So we need to properly check the excipients that we are using to manufacture these pediatric formulations, if they are allowed. We cannot use ethanol in a formulation for pediatric patients. We should have excipients that are suitable for children. What else? Well, are we using the right printer? In our first study, we used a printer that was especially designed for food products. It was a terrible idea. Why? Because it's very difficult to get IQ, installation qualification, operational qualification of this type of printers. So Maybe you can develop formulations using a food printer, but if you want to move to production and clinical, you need to have a proper printer and a proper software that is qualified, because regulatory authorities are going to check that. And also the materials of this printer. It's important to have certifications of everything. Everything that is in touch with the pharma ink, you need certifications. For example, for the syringes. Are the syringes suitable for printing medicines or not? What is the material of the syringes? We always work with manufacturers of the syringes that are suitable for medicines. We do studies of leachable materials, because also these syringes might not be designed for warming formulations, and we are hitting these formulations. So it's very important to have these certifications. It's important to have a printer that is easy to use, that you select the dose and you print. Easy to clean with validated cleaning protocols, because you are going to print different drugs in the same printer. You need to avoid completely cross-contamination. So it's something that you need to consider as well. And the stability. We want to have these medicines stable, ideally for 3-6 months. Although they are extemporaneous formulations, we want them to be stable. And stable, ideally, outside the fridge. So you don't need refrigeration. So if you don't want to have the medicines in the fridge, maybe water is not the right option to have inside the formulation, because if you have water in the formulations in many countries, means that could be microbial growth, and then you need to keep the formulations in the fridge. And that's not ideal for children. Why? Because many of these patients need to take medication while they are in the school, and a chewable tablet that they keep with them is ideal, but should be without water in most of the cases. And it's important to know if these medications that we are going to test are actually tested in clinical trials, were tested before in clinical trials, or they are used in a standard clinical practice. Not just consider something that is developed in a lab in a university, but never tested in real life. So it's very important to things that we develop in a university or in a lab, in a research institution, to move into the hospital and test with real patients. So it's very important to ask patients if they like or not, what they think about this formulation. And it's something that I learned after years of doing research, but it's critical, because sometimes you consider, oh, this is perfect, but patients say, no, this is actually terrible. So these are my things to consider, and I don't want to talk more because I think I talked a lot. And yeah, thank you, Anna. You can continue.
Thank you very much, Alvaro. That was really interesting. So now we've got time for some questions. So please continue to write your questions in the Q&A chat below, and we'll get through as many as we can before the hour. Okay, next question is also for Brooke. So for the integration of 3D printed formulations into your routine hospital pharmacy workflows, can you comment on the regulatory and stability challenges?
Yeah, so I think in the United States, the practice is different than in many other countries. So for pharmaceutical compounding, for this type of compounding, our institution is recognized as under the FDA 503A pathway. And so we compound pursuant to a prescription or an anticipated specific patient need. So we're not doing mass compounding like a 503B facility would be doing, or even like a manufacturer. So for us, we're really looking at, this is truly, truly precision dosing for individual patients, where we may have a patient who really doesn't tolerate, needs an alternative dosage form to what's commercially available. And that's really the hole that we're trying to fill here, which is how can we provide something for a specific patient and not for all patients with a specific tumor type who need this particular medication. So for that reason, again, we're sort of under the 503A pathway. We're also looking at this from USP regulatory side at USP 795, non-sterile compounding. And of course, for hazardous drugs, we apply various parts of USP 800 as well.
Great, thank you very much. So the next question is for you, Alvaro. Can this be applied to natural product derivatives as well?
Yeah, Any type of drug or material can be used. The only limit is the size of these natural products. But if we are talking about products that is in the range of yeah, microns, should be okay.
Great, thank you. Brooke, what measures have you taken to ensure patient safety, especially for children?
Yeah, so great question. One of the things that we're really doing, we're new at this, but we're really trying to keep it to a small cohort of people who are working with the equipment until we get a better comfort level. So it's really just our highly trained, core nucleus of people, 4 to 5 people who are working on it. We're also not opening this widely to all drugs, all patients. We're going to use a very measured approach and try to, like I mentioned, we're coming up with sort of our wish list of products, what we think has the greatest potential for benefiting patients, and then we're going to slowly implement, again, one product at a time, one patient at a time, study the feedback, look at the outcomes. And so we're doing this in a very slowly, very guarded manner instead of just opening it up to everyone. We're also long-term looking at ways to integrate this with our electronic health record to add an additional area for safety. And as we do with all of our compounded products, we take pictures along the way. So we're looking at adding some of that technology as well.
Great, thank you very much, Brooke. Alvaro, how can 3D printing be leveraged in settings where extemporaneous compounding is not common practice?
Well, that's a good question. It's easier to implement 3D printing in countries or in places where extemporaneous compounding is approved. Why? Because sometimes if you cannot do extemporaneous formulations, from a regulatory point of view, it's difficult to implement 3D printing. In some countries like UK, in the UK, it's not common to prepare extemporaneous formulations, but there are always options like exceptions. In the UK, it's like Section 10 exemption of the Medicines Act that allows you to prepare this specific medication for people. So it depends from country to country. I think regulation is changing. In the UK, we have a new regulation for modular manufacturing and point of care manufacture, and 3D printing goes under this new regulation. In Europe, regulation is changing as well for decentralized manufacturing. In the US, new regulation is going to come for distributed manufacturing. So maybe it's necessary a change in regulation, but my suggestion is always talk to the regulatory authorities, and sometimes they allow, or there are ways of implementing this. It depends from country to country.
Thank you. And the next one's for you as well, Alvaro. So how do you print liquids into capsules? Does it solidify? Does it stick to the shell? Does it release?
Well, yeah. So when we are talking about filling, the material needs to be molten material. So it's a material that is hard or solid at room temperature. We warm up this material till 50 or 60 degrees Celsius, so it melts and it's really liquid. And then we put it inside the capsules or the blister and then solidifies in seconds. Examples of these materials: PEG, polyethylene glycol, or other type of fatty materials that melt at low temperature. So it's not that we use water. I said it's a liquid, but it's a liquid because it's molten and it doesn't dissolve the gelatin capsules or HPMC capsules.
Great, thank you very much. This might be for both of you as well. So this person is planning on preparing formulations for polypharmacy. Can you suggest any excipients to be used in the pharma inks?
Well, there are many excipients tested. Uh, what I suggest is to check online, Google Scholar, and put excipients. We publish about many different excipients like polyethylene glycol, fatty materials. So it depends on the drugs that are going to be used, but there are many materials. Normally,
Thank you.
the bases that are used in compounding normally work well.
Great, thank you. Brooke, what is your experience in terms of installing the 3D printers in the hospital, cost, experience, etc.?
Well, my experience has been that, every institution is different. In my institution, I think when I started down this path of learning about 3D printing, I had a perception that I was just buying the printer. And the reality is if you don't already have a lot of the ancillary equipment, and what you can see from this video is it's not just the printer. There's the associated computer, there's the proper types of scales, there's potentially a new hood or biosafety cabinet, there are mixers, there are blister sealers, and there are all the equipment that go with that. There are all the bases that go with that. There are specific syringes you need to use. There are specific labels. So there's a lot of different things that you have to purchase to go along with the purchase of the printer. So I would encourage, if you're thinking about budgeting for this, to really look at this as a comprehensive solution to compounding. This is not just, I'm going to do what I'm already doing and stick it in the printer. This is really a completely changing the way that you think about compounding. You may have some of the tools and equipment, but you may need new things. And I think it's really important to think about this holistically. So for us, we said, oh, well, we can put the printer and we can stick it right here. And the reality is now we've learned as we have the printers that we need a lot more space than we thought to do this the right way. And there's no good way to provide a recommendation on what exactly you need. You have to kind of work through it and learn. I think this is no different than, when a lot of us who implemented USP 800, we started learning as we went with how things were changing. And I think that this is the same thing where you're going to have to just learn as you go and a little bit until more people get experience with it and can share that experience. So I guess that's the best advice I can give you. And also really, with 3D printing, a lot of times if your institution has contracts review or agreements, sometimes you mention this as a new technology and people scratch their head and say, wait, you're going to do what? So you end up explaining to a lot of people what you want to do. And I think you really need to have a good understanding of what it is you're going to do so that you can explain those things along the way.
Great, thank you, Brooke. And just to add to that as well, FABRX can help support new pharmacies, whether it's a hospital or community or a company. If you're interested in pharmaceutical 3D printing, we've got lots of experience in implementation. So I think we've only got time for one more question now. So this might be a bit of both again for Alvaro and Brooke. So the Medimaker appears great for 503A pharmacies. Is there any thought for 503B pharmacies while still maintaining personalization?
Well, obviously, we have different type of printers. I didn't mention. We have Medimaker 1, that is probably the ideal one for 503A pharmacies, as the smaller production. Then we have the Medimaker 2 with 3 print heads that potentially you could use it for a higher throughput. But if you are thinking about something to scale up a lot, ideally you want a system that is more automatic, something that changes the build plates in automatic manner. We are developing some projects around this idea with our Medimaker 2, but it's not yet implemented. But I think it's going in the right way. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. So unfortunately, that's all we have time for today, but thank you very much for everyone for attending, and thank you to our speakers as well. So we will be having another webinar in the coming months, so please do keep in touch, follow us on social media, and if you do have any specific topics you want us to cover in future webinars, please also let us know. And as always, please reach out if you have any specific questions or if you'd like to implement 3D printing into your workflows. So thank you very much and have a good rest of your day.